Good evening, folks. Hi, and welcome to the second webinar in the series of webinars for the Urban Fellows Program here at IIHS. My name is Gautam Bhan. I am faculty at IIHS, and I'm going to anchor this webinar today. And so just to give you a little bit of brief on how this works, you guys are in listen-only mode, and I will sort of speak for about 10 to 12 minutes in the beginning, after which we'll run the whole thing on your questions that you can type in, and they'll start showing up in my screen as we go. So feel free to start with those at any point, probably about 5-6 minutes in. Today's webinar is open-ended. It's on fellowship experiences, so your questions can really be about any part of the process or anything you want, actually, really, about the fellowship or at IHS or about anything else. Okay, so let me do it this way. So I'll broadly speak at about three things. I'll just hint at things, not so much to give you a full information about them, but to give you the kind of things that you can ask more detailed questions about. So use what I'm going to say over the next 10 minutes um, in order to actually just come through and think about where you want to ask questions and where you want to go deeper. So I'll do three things. The first that I will do will be about telling you who should apply for the program. The second thing should be about what happens at the program. And the third is a little bit of the characteristics of the way we do admissions and what we're looking for. Okay. Okay, so first, who should apply? So the thing to remember about the UFP, remember, is that it's a residential full-time taught program. So the first thing to remember is that it is like going back to school. It is like being enrolled in a postgraduate program. And so you should not think of it as something you can do alongside working or on the side or a mix of, online and presence. None of those things hold. It's an intensely taught program, and you're Monday to Friday full-time. It's the only thing that you can do. It isn't designed for you to be able to do other things. So effectively, it acts like a postgraduate qualification. And you already know that we don't have any disciplinary restriction in terms of people attending. And in fact, we have the opposite. If you see our admissions policy on the website, you'll realize that we deliberately curate a batch by discipline, which means that we want a mix of everything from the humanities to the engineering and spatial sciences to the natural sciences to business law, medicine, including the urban spatial sciences of planning, architecture, and design. Every batch we've had has that diversity. We curate for it, and we think it's one of the most valuable things about our fellowship. And so when we say that we're interested in people from any disciplinary background who are curious about the urban, we mean it, but we also do our admissions that way. So many folks feel that, okay, I may apply, but architects will always have an unfair advantage over me, or planners will have an unfair advantage over me, and that's not true. So planners get judged against planners, architects against architects, lawyers against lawyers. So you are judged within your disciplinary field. You're not judged across, because we can't expect the same familiarity with the urban across different disciplines. And I think the reason we take folks across different disciplines is precisely because we are very committed to the idea that the urban is actually shaped, governed, managed, and run by a multiplicity of different disciplines. And one of our biggest problems with actually any integrated management of our urban areas has actually been the disciplinary and professional silos of our professions. The other thing is that you note that the fellowship is blocked towards people who are under 30, 30 or under 30, and there's a reason for that. This is an introductory fellowship. It's not meant to substitute for a very in-depth technical master's in a particular field. It's broadly interdisciplinary. It's where you come to open things up and connect many things. It's not where you come to become a deep, like, for example, if you know you want to do transportation planning, it is not the best place for you to come to become a transportation planner. It is a very good place to come if you have an interest in transportation, but you want to locate transportation in its connections with other kinds of urban sectors. So the interdisciplinarity of the program is an important consideration. And I think that very often we tell folks who are very qualified and very smart, who do very well in the program, that it's not the right fit for them because they're at a point where they want a lot of focus and a lot of depth. We give you a way to open up an entry into the urban sector, to show you its multiple dimensions, to show you the multiple disciplines within it. And then we allow you some amount of depth and expertise, but we are not structured as a single disciplinary or sectoral program. And that's an important thing to know. I think the program is an excellent place, not so much in terms of eligibility criteria, but I think it's a very good place to come to when you're at a time in your life when you're saying, I have an interest in this thing called urban and I need to find a way into it. And very often the folks who come to our fellowship are not people who have previous experience or training in the urban and are looking for a way into the sector. And I think the fellowship is an excellent way to find your focus in the urban, as opposed to come in with an already known urban focus that you're looking to deepen. And I can say more about that depending on the kinds of questions you guys want to ask. Okay, so the second part, what happens when you come in? Now, because we admit a class that is interdisciplinary, coming from different disciplines, some have bachelor, some have master, some are younger, some are older, the curriculum structure is designed in order to bring those different disciplines together and give you a foundation before we start anywhere else. Which means we don't just admit you as a student, say, of English literature or journalism. We then anticipate the things you know and don't know, and we teach you those things so that you begin to catch up. So the first part of the fellowship is called the Commons. And the Commons for us is a place where we teach a shared urban vocabulary precisely to all the different disciplinary backgrounds that our students come in. It's where we teach the economist how to think spatially. It's where we teach the anthropologist how to think in numbers in terms of economic data. It's where we teach the planner to think about social relations. And it's where we teach the visual and graphic arts designer to think structures about governance systems. So this shared set of cross-cutting systems is kind of the foundation of our teaching at IIHS, not just in the UFP, but in all our programs, which is that you need to build a shared interdisciplinary urban vocabulary of the way you understand the interconnectedness of urban systems. So we teach across 6 lenses. We teach identity and social practice, we teach governance, we teach economy, we teach ecology, we teach infrastructure, and we teach planning, right? And these 6 lenses basically come together and overlap in multiple kinds of ways. We put that together, and then when you go from this first commons term into the second half of the course, which is the electives, there you get to choose sectorally, thematically, and do specific courses on transportation, on sanitation, on housing, in terms of sectors, but also in terms of thematic arguments. For example, courses on cinema and visual aesthetics in cities, courses on digital markets, courses on urban regional economic development, courses on Southern urban theory, on climate change, on disasters, etc. And so this combination of the commons to the elective is one trajectory that you should think about, which goes from broad interdisciplinary foundation into applied elective courses that help you begin to also transition into employment. The last part of the fellowship is that the 2-month guaranteed internship, where we place you in a range of sectors to actually apply a lot of the things that you've learned in real time in an actual practice situation, and do it with external institutions. We have about 75 institutions that every year are happy to take IIHS fellows, and a third of them often become employment trajectories for the way things that move out, for where fellows move out to. Alongside and parallel to this, one of the things in the fellowship that's going on that's very strong is that you have something called a practica and a project. So the practica is with the commons in the first interdisciplinary foundation part, and that's when you spend 2 days of your week, of every week, 40% of your time, out in real sites and places in the city. Because one of our core learning sort of bets is that you cannot teach practice in the classroom. So basically you have classroom teaching, and then 40% of your time you're out and actually learning from the city itself, listening to the city itself, learning methods, learning how to observe, learning how to analyze, and learning then to think about proposition and practice. And that term, that happens the practica in the first term. Along with the elective term, you switch from site-based practica to project practica. And the project practica essentially is a situation where IIHS also does live research and practice with external organizations and clients and governments of different kinds. And what fellows do is that they basically join ongoing IIHS practice programs, become part of teams. And this is really a kind of simulation of real world practice work. There are deadlines, there are clients, and there is an individual part of the work that you do as part of that project. And the project can range from various kinds of disciplinary fields, and there are examples of projects that are on the website, and I encourage you to take a look at them in many kinds of ways. Okay, so the core part of the curriculum structure on the commons to the electives via the practica to the project, I think it would do you all a lot of good if you're interested in the program. Spend some time on that page looking at the curriculum elements. Spend time understanding the different courses, why the commons is different from the electives, what is a practica, what is a project. Look at some of the projects that have come earlier here, the testimonials. It's very important for you to be able to do. Okay, so, and when we think a little bit about this transition across what is being taught, the third question that I will sort of just put out there to begin our discussion is to think a little bit about what do people do after. So we get two kind of distinct trajectories for post UFP alumni. The first are folks that want to stick to their original training, but distinguish themselves from their peers by being specialized in the urban. So, for example, we had a fellow who was an engineer who used to work for TCS, came into the fellowship and went back to DMRC and now still works as a software engineer, but specializes in transport systems and works in transport utilities. We had a journalist who comes in, remains a journalist, but becomes a journalist with a specialty in writing about water and sanitation. So you think a little bit about all these kinds of ways. You have architects who come in and use the IIHS and the fellowship in order to shift their scale from the project and the site to the city and its systems, right? So they remain urban, but urban in a different way. So one set of folks come in, keep their core training, use us in a sense to close the T and urbanize, and distinguish themselves professionally from the sector with their peers. A second set of people use us to completely refract, in a sense, from their previous training. So you have lawyers who don't want to practice law but come in and then work actually on law, property, housing rights, and evictions. So they use one part of their training, but they locate it in a different sector. So they actually are looking for a sector shift into the urban, and they use the UFP to figure out what kind of urban sectors and practices happen that allow them to do that. We do have a set of people, though it is a minority of people, who transition into further higher education, into master's or PhD programs after they typically work with us. Typically, they're with us, work for a year or two, and then go in. And they actually do so in order to not just automatically go into a master's because they have to go into a master's because they're 25 and someone told them they should get a master's, but actually go to a master's that they understand why they're going back to grad school. They understand what they want to study in their master's. So they use the fellowship in order to chart a kind of intellectual and practice trajectory and say, okay, now I get what I want to do. This is what I want to do here, and I want to do this kind of program to become better at that. Most of our graduates go into practice immediately. Very few go straight to any kind of education, though I think about 20% of our graduates, probably within 3 to 5 years, tend to either enroll into a master's or to a PhD, so a next kind of higher education level. Obviously, this is because a third of our graduates only have a bachelor's when they come to us, so they do want a master's too at some point to close it off. That's a post-employment trajectory. So in terms of the breadth of places where people go, it really is quite varied. So people go from the social movement to the development sector to to private engineering firms. People work for the government. People have started their own enterprises. They join research think tanks. They join nonprofits. They join incubation and medium startup firms. They join the academy and academia. So there really is a very strong diversity of post-employment trajectories, a lot of which is quite dependent individually on the person, because a lot of it depends what you came in as, right? So we can't compare the trajectory of someone who came in with degrees in planning and architecture to those who came in with degrees in visual art. So, so we don't do standard kind of, this is how you go out, this is how you get recruited. But what we have seen now quite successfully with over 120, 130 graduates of the fellowship is that there are solid, concrete, multiple employment trajectories, and that the interdisciplinarity of our education is something that our fellows have found aids and sets them apart instead of actually being something that they have to overcome. And that's something that they have found happily and we have found happily. It was a question when we started the fellowship about, we can teach as interdisciplinary as we want, but much of the world is organized pretty much around sector and discipline-based professions still, and that's the reality of it, whether we like it or not. But we have found a very interesting trajectory in which these interdisciplinary skills and these urban skills particularly have been welcomed by a range of very different kinds of employers. So the last thing I'll say, and then I'll stop and open it up to questions. So at this point, feel free to start writing your questions and I'll pick them up one by one as they show up in my box. And the last thing I'll say is that, one of the things about the kind of class we're looking for that I think is important, 2-3 things. One is that, room and board is free for all residents of the fellowship. There is a tuition fee this year. but IHS is need blind, which means that we guarantee that we will fulfill the full need of any student that we admit. So don't let financial resources be a consideration in applying at all. Almost all our students get support of some kind, and many of our students get not only full tuition waivers, they also get living stipends. And this is something that we're very committed to as an institution. And there is a distinction between saying we have some scholarships versus saying we are need blind. And I think the word need blind is important, which means we admit you without asking you for any financial information. And once we admit you, we guarantee that whatever we estimate you need, we will give. And that's something that's important to think of. You'll see from our admission policy that we have a very strong commitment to diversity of different kinds, and we actively curate that diversity, which means we give supporting points to applications on the basis of caste, on the basis of parents' education, of region, of gender and sexual orientation, of language, and I will also look at the admission policy. Remember, we have 7 criteria that are all linked there. And that's a very important value we hold at IIHS. We believe in inclusive and diverse classrooms. We don't just do so because of very simple ideas of merit versus inclusion, but actually because we believe that without a classroom that has a diverse set of life experiences, we cannot learn and teach from each other with excellence. So actually our argument for diversity is not inclusion, but excellence. Excellence not understood as the typical thing of where you went to college and what marks you got and how impressive your CV is, but excellence in terms of the lives that you have lived and the experiences that you had. And this is something that we are very specifically looking for to curate. And I think we have learned at IIHS that much of our pedagogical bet is not just what me and other faculty members can teach you, but what you can teach each other as fellows. And for that, if we have a class that is homogeneous in either its discipline or life experience or identity, that learning is incomplete, and that learning is not reflective of our society. And so we are very committed to having very diverse classrooms on all of these fronts, and to support learners who come in with certain disadvantages into the classroom because of their life trajectories. Though I will say in an interdisciplinary classroom, one nice thing is that everyone is someone who needs help on something or the other. So some axes of different mixed classroom means that everyone needs some kind of catch up. And I think this is something that we also believe in, that there aren't particular people who need to catch up. Everyone needs to catch up, and everyone knows some things and doesn't know others. Everyone has the benefit of some privileges and not others, and therefore for us it's a question of catching everybody up to what's short instead of thinking about a particular category of students that doesn't. So let me stop there, and let me encourage you to put your questions in, and then as I see the questions, I'll read each of the questions out loud and I will answer your questions. And remember, you can ask me about the curriculum, you can ask me about admissions, you can ask me about employment, you can ask me about specific teaching, and I'm happy to answer any of them. Feel free to ask questions about your particular personal circumstances, about thinking about whether the program is a right fit for you, or what makes a good application. Any of those things, I'm happy to answer them. Okay, so let me take a break and I will have a sip of my coffee, and I will wait and let you guys type in your questions. So go ahead, the floor is open. Tanvi, just technically, my colleague Tanvi is also on the call with me. Just in case you see questions and don't hear me pick them up, that means I'm not seeing them.
Okay.
So I can't see them. So in that case, sorry, then you may have to actually pick them up. I can't see the questions in the chat.
Okay, I thought you could see the questions. Okay, I'm going to read out the first one. It says, hi, Gautam, I'm an architect interested in landscape. Do you think this course will be good for me to be able to connect to landscape and urbanism and understand it better?
So yes, I think it is, but I think that you should know that if you're specific about, so here's a good example of degrees of interdisciplinarity, right? So if you're specific about saying that I'm an architect and I want to learn about landscape, that's one opening. There are other places you can do that as well. With us, you will get an opening out of architecture, but it won't only be to landscape. We will actually move you structurally to all kinds of urbanism. So you have to want to move from architecture, not just to landscape, which is still a spatial view at a different scale, but you're going to actually have to want to go from everywhere from caste and gender to governance to municipal finance, etc. So think a little bit about that. If you're quite certain where you are in your life, that what you want is a scaling from site architecture to landscape and cities, and you can do that here, but that's not the focus of the program. We'll go several degrees further. And if that's something you want, it's a good fit. If you want something a little bit within still architectural practice but changing the scale, there are programs of landscape architecture and urban design, for example, that will give you that in a more specific way. We don't have that much of a focus.
Okay. The next question is, I have already pursued a master's in urban studies from Ambedkar University. What should a student like me expect from the course? What would be different?
So I'm not completely familiar with the new urban studies program at Ambedkar, but I would ask yourself, and this is really particular to you, if you've just done a master's program in urban studies, then what makes you want to apply to a program of urban practice? And I think that the answer you will give yourself will tell you a lot. So what is it that you're still looking for? Are you looking for, what did you find that was not complete after a master's at urban studies? Do you, for example, you may want certain technical or sectoral kind of locations a little bit more. You may want more of an orientation to practice or project facing work. But I think that if you've done a master's in urban studies, this is something that you should ask yourself, which is there something that you did not get that you're looking for? And if you can specify that in a follow-up question, I'll be better placed to answer it, because I haven't quite seen what is taught in the urban studies curriculum at Ambedkar, so I can't compare. But for all of you who've done similar degrees, I would ask you the same question, because we'll also ask you in your interview, what's it that makes you want to apply it to a classroom again? Why not go work? So think a little bit about what it is that you're looking for, and then we'll be able to better tell you. But it is a good question for you to ask. But don't think so much of what we can offer you. Try and think about your own motivation that makes you want to go back to a classroom in a similar subject.
Okay. Next question is, can you elucidate on the admission process to the fellowship, specifically more about the interview process?
Sure. So as you know, you fill out an online application, and it's got a set of 3 questions that are really quite simple. I think that in those questions, one of the first ones is why you want to be an urban fellow. Now, I can't stress to all of you on the call how important that question is. And the reason that question is important is because, see, we have a philosophy at IIHS that everyone can learn. We're not evaluating you on some threshold, marks, cutoff type of deal. We want to know this is the right fit for you. So we want to know that you've looked at this fellowship, you've looked at the curriculum, you like the way the program is structured, you like this program for what it does. It's not a program that does everything, right? Like I was giving you an example, it's not the best program if you have a clear professional focus and you want depth in it. So it may not be a great program for the person who asked the question about architecture and landscape. So I think that we want a right fit. So the more you tell us that you have looked at the fellows program, you've looked at the curriculum design, you like the way it's, you like the way that it's, you like the way that it's, you like the way that it's structured, the more we see, okay, they have a right fit for this program. So in the fellowship, in the application, please don't try and impress us. Don't try and write in a certain style. Don't try and write in a certain Angrezi. For those of you who are Hindi speaking, don't write in some kind of like exalted academic type of, please just write like yourself. The more normal, natural, direct, honest reply we get, that's the one we're going to pick. We are looking for clarity, we're looking for honesty, we're looking for curiosity. Ask many questions, tell us why you want to study the urban, tell us the things you don't understand. You will impress us more if you show us curiosity with open questions and saying, this is what I want to learn, than trying to impress us with the 10 things you already know. We want to know that you're looking at the cities around you and you're saying, what can I do about this? Why is this like this? I want to understand this. That's what we want to see in your application. We want to see curiosity over anything else, and a decision in your life that the urban, something called the urban, you don't even know what within the urban, what sector, what practice, what degree, but something about cities and the urban fascinates you. That's what we want to see. Right? So that's the core part of that process. The written application gets scored. Several faculty read each application. It's individually scored, and then we do a cutoff list in terms of disciplines. As I said to you, we divide it up into disciplinary categories. And then the interview, so typically we get about 700-ish applications. We interview about 100-ish people. And then in the interview, we're not really looking for something very different. We're basically looking to see and kind of confirm and put you together with your application, essentially. We want to understand a little bit better some of the things that we're not quite sure of in the application. So it kind of gives you a chance to round it off. It's also a very useful exercise because, some people speak better than they write, and some people write better than they speak. So between the two of them, you get one or the other chances to pick it up.
Can I move to the next question?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, I'm pursuing agriculture and I'm in the final year. I'm very interested in urban policies, but I'm really confused how I can connect my sector to urban areas.
I don't think it's an issue at all. One of our core research projects at IIHS right now, for example, is called Hungry Cities. And Hungry Cities is a multi-year examination of urban food systems. And they are by necessity, it's peri-urban research. It's along the rural-urban supply chain. We had a student this year, actually, who's just finished, who came from an agricultural background herself. And she studied everything from, mandis in urban areas to APMC yards that do large-scale wholesale buying, saw food and agriculture as climate change issues, as disaster issues, looked at peri-urban food security in the context of climate change, looked at labor practices and employment practices, looked at gender and migration and agriculture, so, while we say we are urban, and we are definitely urban in the sense of being a settlements institute. We do not compete with someone who has a rural focus like IRMA. So we don't look at the world from the rural, right? So it's not like IRMA doesn't look at the urban. They look at the urban from the rural. We look at the rural, but from the urban. So certainly we are not a place where you come to get more depth knowledge about agriculture, but translating agriculture and its connections into food systems and urban systems is absolutely something. If you're interested in doing that, if you're interested in building on agricultural training and building into the urban, then it's a very good transition for you to make. And I think there are multiple ways in which you can connect that.
Okay, next question. I'm an architect interested in the fellowship. I have two questions. One, how are the courses graded? Will there be exams or paper submissions? And second, what kind of questions can we expect in the interview?
So the course it is a graded fellowship, yes, but it is not a marks type graded fellowship. We don't do exams. So we have a wide variety of assessment processes. We do strange things. One is you have a lot of choice in the mode in which you want to submit your assignments. So previous fellows have written papers, but they've also produced audiovisual material. They've argued visually. Two of them made a board game in the response to every assignment, and they eventually started a board game company after they went, because that was their passion. So we're not very wedded to very specific forms of assessment. One of our core assessments actually is something called an interview. So fellows do 2 interviews in the process, at the end of the commons and the end of the electives. And essentially we talk to you for half an hour and we ask you to decide how well you've done, how you've moved, what's changed about you. So our assessment criteria are not very, they're not very sort of marks and assessment based, but they're basically created so that you are able to get a sense of your own progress. So there are definitely elective courses that have exercises and assignments, and you've got to finish those, and those are graded. But we don't believe in a sort of very fine distributions of marks. A lot of it is actually to build your own seat. As a practitioner, you're not going to have someone telling you whether you did right or wrong. You have to develop the instinct to be able to judge the quality of your own work and hold yourself to that standard. That's what lasts in the long term. We try and build that ability in you as much as possible. So multimedia assignments, non-standard assessments, a lot of self-assessment and different forms is my answer. A lot of our thing is teamwork-based presentations, actually. A lot of our assessment is joint teamwork. In the practica and the project, you basically do external jury-facing final presentations. You make outputs. We put on an exhibition. So it's a mix of things. In the interview, it depends on what you write in the application. We will likely talk to you about your essay. We want to get a sense of who you are. We want to think a little bit on how you think on your feet. Again, we want to sense your curiosity. We want to sense your excitement. But again, most importantly, we want to sense that you understand what this fellowship is, that it's a right fit for you at this time in your life, and that this is actually going to help you grow. And that your time here will be of value for you. That's kind of what we're looking for. It's not a trick interview. We're not setting you up. We're not testing your brilliance or how much information you have. We just want to get a sense of you as a person.
Okay. Next. Hi Gautam, I'm an architect currently practicing by myself, where I'm trying to fit in communities from around the site in the construction process. In what ways could this course enrich the same?
Yeah, so this, I mean, you are a ideal type for a lot of folks that come here. So something like this, something that puts social processes into a built form project, right? So how do I think about co-produced architecture? How do I understand social dynamics that think about that? How do I think about mixing these two types of ways of working together? This is a classic fellowship kind of example. So many of the architects we get actually are folks who are trying to practice their architecture in different ways. So you would fit that first type of person I described, an architect who wants to continue using their architectural training, but wants to practice in a different way. So I think the fellowship would be a very good place for someone like you. And so, and to the rest of you asking a question about applications, this is the story you should write in the application. I tried this. This is what worked. This is what didn't work. And I realized that as an architect, working with the community sounds fantastic, but on the ground, it's really not as obvious or simple. You don't just pick up and start, and it's not solidarity. And these are tense technical processes. They require a lot of empathy. They also require a lot of rigor. And there's a science to thinking about how to work with communities. And there's sociology and social knowledge, none of which architects get taught when they get trained, because they don't get trained in anything other than a particular set of technical skills. And so, that kind of moments of intersection where you realize that your practice and your training has brought you so far, but there's another set of knowledge and practices that you need to go further. That's an excellent time to come to the fellowship, because that's what the fellowship will give you, a number of different ways to think about what that process of co-production can look like. So that's a very good focus to bring into a fellowship.
Okay, next question. I'm a student of architecture who would like to apply for the UFP. I will officially graduate in June 2021. Am I eligible to apply in March, April 21 for the 2021 batch of the UFP, given that I would not have officially graduated until June?
Yeah, that's fine. June, wait, what is it?
June
So
2021, which is the next one.
So you'll graduate in 2020, right? You'll graduate in a few months.
No, she's saying
so as
she'll
long as
graduate
you're,
in
as long as
2021.
Okay, so I'm not completely sure I understand the year. So if you're not graduating till 2021, then you can't apply for this batch, obviously. If you're done in June 2020, but your degree is not done, or you've not officially got it, or you graduated, we don't care about that. As long as you're not going to class in architecture school and you are free full time and you can move to Bangalore and start the program, we don't care. I mean, remember, you can apply to this program with a 10+2 high school certificate. So it doesn't matter. And so whether you've done it or not done it, or graduated or even failed in architecture, it doesn't matter. We don't care. So write us a good story about what you want to learn. And if you failed architecture, you failed architecture. It doesn't matter. If you haven't graduated, it doesn't matter. So no, it doesn't matter. As long as you're free and can move to Bangalore, it doesn't matter.
Just to clarify, Gautam, she's saying she'll graduate in June 2021 and she wants to apply for the 2021 batch.
So that's what I don't understand. So does that mean it is 2020 right now? So the 2021 batch starts in August, right? Sorry, I'm very confused. So again, I will repeat. If your finish is, we start in August in 2020. So if you're not doing anything else for your architectural program, where your formal graduation is, doesn't matter, as long as you're free to move to Bangalore. If you're talking about 21 as in next year, then of course we can, when we apply the program next year, you can apply next year. That's 2021. That I kind of bungled that question. Anyway, doesn't matter.
Let me just move down. Hi Gautam, what are you looking for in the work samples which will be submitted as a part of the application process? Is it an interest towards the urban, or is it a specific kind of understanding of the urban?
So the work samples don't have to be urban. Again, we're not looking for a performance of the knowledge of urban you already have. You're applying to a foundational fellowship to understand the urban. The work sample has to give us a sense of your work. So it has to give us a sense of it. It should complete the story of the rest of your application. So it should show us the way you think. It should show us the way you produce things. It should show us the way you argue. The sample doesn't have to be urban at all. You can, if you're a history graduate and you wrote a paper in college about some archival work that talked about a particular historical moment, send us that, because we're wanting to see the quality and rigor of your work. If you're a so we just want to see some sense of what you've produced. We're not looking for an urban argument in it. But one of the things that people get wrong a lot in work samples, we're looking for a sense of you. So especially if you're sending us portfolios, and if you're sending us, give us some sense to find you in it. So an architectural portfolio that has your hand sketches in it does much better than if I get a standard 5-page rendered plaza diagram, which I get a lot, right? So, and if you do submit group work, write us a small note in the other comment box and say, look, this is what I did in it. I did the background work. I did the research here. That's all. We want to get a sense of something you produce, so it fits with the rest of your application to give us a sense of the way you work. That's what we want from the work sample.
Okay, next question. I recently completed my master's in public policy. I'm interested in academia and planning to do a PhD later. I'm figuring out my research topic and was wondering if the fellowship could help me gain perspective of niche urban sectors in India.
Yes, this is a common trajectory that folks take. You've come out of a public policy degree, you want to move into a PhD, and you're looking for the right kind of question. Then we are a good place for you to come. And I think the fellowship gives you many opportunities to find and refine your own research interests. Just remember that you should have a sense that you want your research interests and your research to be interdisciplinary. Because if you already have a kind of specific question in mind, then there may be other ways for you to refine that. But if you're basically saying, I've come out of MPP, I want to do something urban, but I don't know enough about how to craft a PhD or research in urban, then the fellowship is a very good place for you to come, because we'll expose you to many, many, many possible sites and then work with you to say, now you've seen all of this, what's your entry in this? Where do you fit in this? What's your practice in this? What's your question in this? So if you're looking for a question like that and you know that it's going to be broadly interdisciplinary, then it's a good place to come to find a research inquiry. Yeah.
Do you think someone with 5-6 years of experience in urban design would be a good fit?
So I think that if you're someone who's got 5 years of experience, right, I would ask you the same question I asked the person who had done the Masters of Urban Studies from Ambedkar. What is it that makes you want to go back to a classroom? I think that if you're wanting to apply to a program like this, you've hit some point in your practice where either you feel like you're not growing, or you're not being able to move in certain ways. You're feeling a little bit like you've got lost in the everyday of it and want to see big picture, or want to look at another way of looking for things. So I think that the fellowship is very valuable for people who have a set of practice. And most of the fellows, at least half the class comes with 3 to 4 years, 3 to 4 years of practice. A minority will come with 5 to 6 to put you at sort of closer to the age limit. But I think every year we have students like that. And I think that what's really useful is for you in your application to give us a sense of what makes you want to come back from practice. So what is the kind of reflection you're looking for? What is the knowledge you're looking for? And typically the practitioners we get are the folks who are saying, look, I keep doing this, and now I keep realizing that I'm trying to solve a problem through design, and the problem actually cannot be solved only through design, because it's partly social, and there are these community dynamics, it has an economic base, and the financial structure doesn't work. And I realized that through my practice that all these problems have these multiple dimensions, and my training is giving me one way to solve them, and I don't know how to solve or anticipate the rest of them. So how do I become a designer who's better at thinking about how municipal finance shapes urban diversity design? So if the questions that are making you want to come back from practice are precisely questions of how interconnected wicked practice problems are, and how linked our cities and systems are at every scale, then the fellowship is a really good place for you to come, because it helps you structure and step back from your practice, your projects, similar types of clients, similar types of work, and step back and say, how could I rethink my practice and do it differently? And I think that the practitioners who come to our program often come for that. They've worked for multiple years, they've had some successes, they've had some tensions, and they want to sort of reflect on 4 or 5 years of work and say, where do I go next? And how do I learn and restructure my approach to my practice? And the fellowship is a very good place to come for that. So here's 2 very interesting trajectories. The person who wants to go for a PhD and is looking for a research trajectory, and the person who's coming from practice and is looking to reflect on their practice and have new directions. Both of these sit together very nicely in the fellowship. They're both very good applications to the fellowship.
Okay. This is a slightly longer question. I'm an architect with an undergraduate degree and have set up my own
Why everyone's an
practice.
architect today, man? What's up with the webinar? Okay.
I've been working there for
But it's
about
okay.
3 years now. So I'm an architect with an undergraduate degree and have set up my own practice. I've been working there for 3 years. I'm interested in learning more about visual and social anthropology in the urban realm and how to look at it from various perspectives. Do you think this course could help me before I give a shot at a master's in visual anthropology and help me broaden
Perfect.
my horizon of looking at anthropological and ethnographic issues?
Perfect. Classic fit. Apply. Admit. Done. Aja. This is exactly the right thing, right? So if you're looking, here exactly is one of those things where you're like, I know the new dimension I want, and it's totally out of my wheelhouse. It's like visual anthropology. It's very specific. This is an excellent place for you to come. It's a very good way to come in, learn new discipline vocabularies, understand whether visual anthropology is what you want, or there are other ways to think about it. Move, open your training, add that, and then see if you want to build upon it in different ways. So yeah, so I think what I'm trying to say to you guys is an interdisciplinary fellowship is an excellent place. The minute you want to say, I want to do something slightly differently from the training that I have, I want to add something new to it, that makes you a good fit for the UFP. So yeah, this would be a very good way. This would be a very good place to come for that.
Okay. Next question is again from an architecture student. I recently completed my architecture thesis that had a lot to do with villages in the peri-urban areas within the city. Since then, I've been looking to understand the phenomena of how villages are urbanized in the periphery of the cities. Do you think the fellowship will help me get deeper into the subject? Although I ask a rather specific question, I'm really interested in understanding the various processes that are involved in the making of these villages.
So look, for those of you that have a very specific kind of inquiry that you're bringing in, that's absolutely fine. The only thing you have to remember is that it will take some time in the fellowship for you to be able to focus all your work around that inquiry. So when you come into that inquiry on peri-urban village transformation and the formation of the village into the urban, during the commons, we will pull you back from that question. You will not get to go straight and work on it. We'll actually say, step back, understand the systems and the structures first. And then when you get to the electives, you can actually tailor a lot of your work and pick your sites and do project work precisely on the peri-urban, on the village. The peri-urban and the village will constantly show up in your comments because you can't understand ecology without it. You can't understand planning without it. You can't understand identity without it, right? So it will keep coming to you in different ways. And I think what's nice about having a question in your mind, you don't have to have one, but if you have one, you do the work. Every time you hear new things, you start connecting it in your head to what you care about. Right? So I think that the thing is that it's good to come in with a particular question. This kind of a question is absolutely suited to us. Two of our students in this batch, for example, did their project on understanding what happened to the old Dalit areas of peri-urban villages in Bangalore when the municipal corporation took in 108 villages into the urban from them being rural, right? And they looked and traced caste transformation in peri-urban village incorporation, precisely to ask the question of not just what is the peri-urban, but what happens to social dynamics when villages urbanize. So this was their project. They'll write it up as a paper. So there's absolutely space for you to focus on individual projects like this, but in the second half of the fellowship. For the first half of the fellowship, we're going to pull you back and say, look, you can't just do one thing. This can't be the only thing. So you can't be only interested and wake up in class when peri-urban or village comes up. You're going to have to be open to actually learning a large set of things and keeping this as a focus through. So as long as you're good with that, this is a very good question to come through with. Yeah.
Okay. Would you recommend this fellowship for someone who has a master's in social sciences and a few years of work experience in rural as well as urban space? I'm deeply interested in studying identity, labor, and migration in the urban. While I have found certain components of the course quite interesting, most of it feels familiar and introductory. I'm working on my PhD application and I'm wondering if this fellowship would be a good space to meditate over my question.
Is it a good space to meditate over a question while writing a PhD application? No. Because if you're already quite set and are at the point where you're framing that question, then you will likely not want that kind of opening up and exposure that we're going to take you through. So I think, I mean, your background is fine. The background is not what, and the points of interest you have are fine. But again, it depends on where you are in your life. If you've got a specific question that you're chasing, right? It goes, and you're looking to apply later this year already, then you may, if that's your singular focus, then a fellowship that comes, puts you out, and reopens you structurally may frustrate you. You may actually sort of say, look, so in the question of will it be repetitive, one thing I will say to all of you is all of you will study something that you studied before. That's the nature of interest in fellowship. But I think that our experience over the last 5 years of teaching this is one that typically we teach it in different ways because we're teaching it not on its own. So I teach, for example, the opening Commons week on identity and social practice, right? But I don't teach it in the way an urban sociologist would teach it or the way you would learn it in social sciences. And the reason for that is I'm setting up an interdisciplinary systems perspective and I'm setting up a notion of urban practice. So we have a very different reason to teach the same things. So there will be some overlap for sure. The good thing about it is the max you'll have for an overlap is a week, right? So you may be, so everyone is kind of like, oh, I studied identity before. All the social scientists get very happy when we teach identity and governance. And then we move to ecology and infrastructure and planning, and they all become a little bit like quiet. So typically what happens in a good program is you may have some overlaps, but it'll always be the minority of it. But for you, I would consider something different. If you're really quite clear on a question you want to develop, then I'm not sure that going into a very intensive program that's going to really open up many new things, it may not always be the right fit for you. And that's something that you should think about. If you're that close and that focused to writing a PhD application already, then perhaps a program that broadens as opposed to narrows is not the best fit at this time. So think about that.
Okay, I come from a humanities background. How much technical knowledge would this fellowship grant me? Or what can I expect from this fellowship?
So you will get out knowing how to read data. You'll get out knowing how to make maps. You will get out knowing how to do basic computational and statistical analysis. You will get out knowing how to use audio or video editing. These are non-negotiable skills in the Commons. So our Commons methods, you've got to be able to read data and get it from public data sources. You need to know how to use an NSS or a census or an NSSO, know how to use those tables, understand them, process them. You need to know how to read maps. You need to know how to do basic map making. You need to make layers. You need to know GIS, basic core skills. The elective skill labs change that and essentially start saying, okay, now you have the basic core skills of what we consider an urban practitioner is. You're not afraid of maps, you're not afraid of data, you're not afraid of numbers, you're not afraid of qualitative methods and narrative, and you know how to make surveys, for example. So we teach you those as core methods. Then you specialize. So you may go deeply into spatial analysis and take advanced GIS, or you may never do GIS again, but you know how to read a basic GIS map. You know how to make layers, you know how to work with locational data. You may go into podcasts, you may go into advanced media skills, you may go into advanced writing, you may go into advanced statistical analysis. So we ensure a base level of methods that where essentially you are someone who is able to read technical information and understand it, even if you're not able to replicate the data. That's kind of the bar we have for the core methods. After that, it's up to you. If you're interested and want to become good at something, you take the elective skill labs as you're choosing. But in the elective term, you decide which skills to deepen. We don't take that. So that's kind of what you come out with. So as a humanities person, you're not going to come out as a statistician, but you're going to come out as a person who's going to understand a statistician. That's a good way to think about it.
Okay, the batch would comprise of how many fellows totally, and when is the deadline for the application?
Can you remind me, Tanvi, when the deadline for the application
is? It's 19th April.
19th April is the deadline for the application, and the batch is going to be about 35, something like that. We don't have an exact number in mind, but something around 35.
Okay. If my sample of work doesn't need to be urban based, on what basis am I assessed for my application?
Because we read it next to your disciplinary training, we read it next to your answers. So we will have our faculty pretty much covers the entire disciplinary base of what we assess. So if you are a historian, we will get a historian to read your work. So we're trying to get a sense of complexity. We're trying to get a sense of innovation. We're trying to get a sense of the way you're thinking and your questions are coming. We want a little bit of a sense of something that you've produced. So that's where the assessment is. So again, it doesn't have. We're not looking for a certain kind of dazzle or polish or English. We're looking for a certain and kind of interesting quality in saying, okay, look, they're engaging with this argument. They've produced this work. They've gone into this kind of detail. So we're looking for a kind of attentiveness and care in the work more than anything else.
I'm preparing for UPSC exams, and particularly I'm an administrative service aspirant. So how would this fellowship be helpful in enhancing my knowledge?
I mean, don't take it if you think it's going to help you with UPSC. It's not. I should be very blunt. I think you should not apply to the fellowship unless you're interested in the urban by itself. Now, if you want to think about how one governs urban areas and what it means to be an IS officer in urban areas and what it means to think about the development of urban areas as part of your work, then it's a good place for you to apply. But is it going to specifically open knowledge that is relevant for UPSC? No, it's not meant to do that. I don't know what the extent of the overlaps would be. I know that we have 3 years ago, I think, we had a student who was doing his mains and then he joined the UPSC right after graduation. He cleared it while he was there. And I think he found it very useful in terms of thinking about structures, approaches to urban development and governance in general. Quite separately from thinking about the UPSC itself. In some way, actually, so I teach at IIHS teaches at the Lal Bahadur Shastri Masuri Academy of Administration. We train IS officers in all things about urbanization. So in that way, we have our content is very much about, and it's exactly the same thing I say to them. You have to think about the urban as complex, as interconnected as multiple systems. You cannot separate the spatial from the social from the economic. And how do you take a governance regime that is, I mean, look at where we are right now with coronavirus, right? And you think about the kind of multiple urban systems that have to work at the same time. And you think about the kind of urban knowledge and training our bureaucracy and our government should have when they need to weigh the livelihood risk of a lockdown versus a health risk of a lockdown, where they need to understand that different spatial environments in our cities have completely different risk geographies for morbidity vectors for disease. Where you would never simplistically, I would hope that any graduate of our program would never seriously or simplistically use the words either social distancing or work from home in the context of a highly informal urban economy. That they would know those words would be fairly meaningless for a majority of our residents, because that comes from an understanding of the nature of our urban economy and particularly its dynamics of migration, mobility, and informality. It would come from a notion of our built environment where the notion of social distancing in informal settlements is completely not even a possibility. Where it would come from a notion of health systems and governance to think about central and straight questions of urban governance and who can actually, it was a very interesting story this morning in the paper where the Delhi government tried to shut down the Delhi airport and said no flights will come. And the central government said, actually, you can't shut down an airport, only we can shut down the airport. Now, this is an urban governance question. So we would cover all of this in the fellowship in different ways. So in that way, it'll be very useful for you when you're an IS officer, and I hope you become one. Good luck, etc. But it's certainly not something that directly aids to UPSC in that formation. If that's what you meant, if I misunderstood that, then I hope I've answered your question in a different way.
Since you mentioned about the minority of fellows who went on to do masters, I wanted to know whether the course encourages an in-depth focus on any particular field that the fellow might develop.
So the reason why a minority of our fellows go on to do masters is because most of our fellows come post-masters. So the class is about, typically about 30% comes post some kind of undergrad, another about 40 or 50% comes post-masters, right? And so, so they don't go on to do second master. That's mostly the reason. Almost everyone who comes after their bachelor's eventually does a master's. Do we enable focus in this? Yeah, so I think what happens again in the elective term is, again, do we do focus on a particular sector or track? Not so much. But certainly you can begin to focus on, so for example, you have 4 elective courses you take. right? And the minute you take 4 technical elective courses, you actually begin to build so you can take one course in climate, one in disaster, one in urban governance missions, and one on land. Now, those 4 are very connected in thinking. In your mind, they can very much be a single trajectory in moving towards urban sustainability, for example. So there are ways to do threads of emphasis, for sure. I'm distinguishing between, it's not that everything is at a level where you just learn lots about everything. So the move from the commons to the elective is a move towards depth and specialization, but it's not a sectoral specialization. And that's the only thing I want you to set up. So if you're looking to go to do a master's in urban design or master's in transportation, then you will go to those narrower sectoral disciplinary problems with a broad interdisciplinary outlook from us. And many fellows find that incredibly useful, right? That they take the breadth from us and then go to very specific sectoral programs. So most fellows after graduating don't want to do very narrow sectoral programs. So that's kind of the way it runs.
Okay. Hi again. The urban excites me, but all I have at the moment is keywords that fascinate me, which is transport, urban economics, design, settlements, culture, languages. I'm not even sure why these excite me so much. I hope that the UFP would help me understand what I'm interested in within the urban and why, and help me decide, 1 minute, and help me decide what I would like to do a master's in. Would I be a good fit for the UFP?
Yep. There would be, it's good to say this is exactly what I mean, partly by curiosity, but you do have to do one thing. It can't be this open. So pick one of those things you said and tell us and give us a sense that you have already thought through this in some way. You may not have answers, but tell us about the quality of the questions that you have. So pick one of them, right? Culture. And tell us the story in the application about what do you mean by urban culture? Where did you see it? How do you encounter it? What do you want to do? What questions do you ask about it, right? Like, so you see, you see a kind of, you walk on the street and you see a procession and you think about what kind of urban form this is, right? You think about protests as urban culture. You think about festival. You take yesterday's, let's take yesterday's 5 p.m. Janta curfew, thali banging thing. That's, I mean, in one way, it's a cultural idiom and as a governmental response. What questions does it raise? Do you like it? Do you not like it? What questions do you ask of it? So when you write your application, the thing about it is not to tell us that you're interested in many things in the urban. The thing to show us is that you're already thinking about these things in the urban. Give us a sense of the way you think about one of these things. Tell us a narrative, an incident, something that shows us that you are able to look at something in a city and you're asking lots of questions about it. That's what tells us that you're ready to come to the fellowship. It's because you've got a lot of good questions. I don't think that, so one wants to see your curiosity taken to one extra step of saying, I'm already looking and analyzing, and now I want the right terms and tools to analyze more structurally, more carefully, and more rigorously. That will make you a good fit for it.
Okay. When would the selected students be notified of their admission?
I don't know this off the top of my head, but the timeline is on the website. My sense is it's somewhere around June.
So the shortlisted candidates for the interview will be contacted by 3rd week of May, and by June, the selected and waitlisted candidates will be informed. So,
yep, there you go.
Okay. Next question. As you mentioned that half of the classes of experienced people, is there a disadvantage for the fresh graduates with no work experience to get selected?
No. So I think that, so we like that mix. Work experience is not a requirement of the fellowship. And I think that, and we mean that seriously, which means we do always take students who come fresh. Again, if you're coming fresh out, don't take the effort in your application to tell us how you're already engaging with questions about the urban. What are you looking to build? What are you looking to become? What is this leading up to? What are your instincts telling us? Telling you about what makes you apply to the program. So it's not a disadvantage to you, but it means you have to articulate your your sort of potential to us in a different way. So see, typically if you look at the breakup of our classes, we tend to have about, most of the class is somewhere between 24 and 28. So most of the class has worked in some fashion, and I think that work experience is very useful because people's life experiences come in. But it's also good to have both the other two tail ends of the class that are, between 28 and 30 and between 21 and 23 or say, because they come with a certain kind of newness and questions that are really useful. It's that mix that actually really, really works, because when you've been in classes where everyone sort of comes from very very strong work credentials, you also have a lot of unlearning to do. Then unlearning becomes slightly difficult when everyone's kind of coming and already locked up. So we have found that the mix of working, non-working, and remember, these words are very specific because you're really talking about formal wage labor and non-formal wage labor, but everyone has an experience of work in different capacities anyhow. You may have mobilized and organized in your college, you may have done political work, you may have done writing and advocacy work, you may have been we also don't think of all work only as professional wage work. By that logic, our entire notion of feminist economics would be very weak. So it's also an expansive sense of drawing on other experiences that show your capacity to propose and practice and not limit that to waged work. So tell us about other things you've done. Tell us about other moves that you've made, and we will take that as seriously.
Okay. Next question. I've been working in a travel company for the last 4 years, and lately I've been interested in sustainable living, anthropology, etc. I want to use travel and study other aspects as well. Will this course help?
I think the course will give you lots of inputs and ideas that could potentially be useful for you in this question of sustainability and travel, but you'll have to make some of the connections for yourself. I think certainly if you're interested in sustainability, it's a core part of the course, and you can really pick those up, but we think of sustainability often in very different kinds of ways. So I think you can bring it back and tie it up to the practice you're bringing in. Not all the connections may make immediate sense. So you may have to sort of wait and be a little bit patient about taking things that seem unconnected. But I think you could take a lot of it back. Yeah, you'll have to do some of the work of bringing it. Immediate fit nahi hoga. So you'll have to think a little bit about how to connect those things slightly loosely. As opposed to say a more specific course on sustainable tourism, which would give you immediate things for your practice. This will not give you immediate things for that. So there will be a degree of removal. So just think about that.
I have studied philosophy. I want to learn urban planning and architecture and return to philosophy. Do you think this course would help?
You want to do philosophy, study planning, and come back to philosophy. Yeah, I think the course will give you many. I think the course will give you many conceptual ways in which you could work through planning back to philosophical origins. Yeah, I think this would. So I think one thing for all of you to think about is the electives particularly allow you to take a very technical sector practice track, allow you to take a very theoretical philosophical track, and allow you to take a very thematic applied track, right? So you can take 3 theory electives or 3 sector electives or 3 thematic electives. So that grouping is where you begin to bring back your own focus post the commons, which you all do together. So yeah, you can certainly take a way through that takes a kind of urban theory route through the fellowship, and you use and you read and you construct a set of abstractions and conceptual frameworks that you can then take back to philosophy. You could, no, I think it would be a very nice, again, that's a nice trajectory because it's clear. You know why you want the urban, you know you want urban theory, you know you want conceptual frameworks, and you know you want to bring them back to philosophy. The more clarity you have on what you want out of it, the better your application, the better the fellowship is for you. And I think that's a general principle I want to give to all of you on the webinar. If all of your backgrounds are fine to come, the question is not that. The question is, are you clear on what you're looking for? The more clear on what you're looking for, the better you answer that question of why you want to be a fellow, and the better chances are of getting in. And so whether you've done that Ambedkar Studies course in Masters, whether you've done the social science work applying for your PhD, the question I would ask you again is ask yourself, what is it that I want from this? And when you're able to say, I'm looking to find urban theory frameworks to connect to my philosophical training, that's a very clear answer to that question. Makes a very, and then I would say yes, absolutely.
Okay. I'm a Teach for India fellow. I completed my undergraduate in sociology, psychology, and economics. I've been interested in policy and governance. I'm not sure in which area specifically I'm willing to explore. Do you think the fellowship will help me before I apply for my master's?
It will, as long as you're certain that urban is a place where you want to do policy and governance. If you're not certain of the urban, then certainly it's not a good fit for you. But if you're not clear, If you're broadly open to thinking about policy and governance in the urban and you're looking for a kind of sector or a kind of way to do urban policy and governance, yes, then it's a very good fit for you. Then I would, so that would be the distinction I would make.
Okay. I'm to pursue a master's abroad post the fellowship. Is the fellowship recognized in foreign universities?
Yes, many of our students apply. Many of them go abroad. They go with letters from us, and we have had no issue so far.
Okay. When is the time to select our electives? Is it while applying for the fellowship itself or before the elective classes?
Before. So you basically you start the commons in about September or August when you come in, and then that goes till about November, and then you go off for the Diwali break, and right before you go for the break, you pick your electives. So it's towards the end of the commons, not before that.
Regarding the work sample to be submitted along with the application, I've completed a dissertation as a part of my undergraduate program. Would you recommend submission of my dissertation of about 10,000 words or a shorter version of it?
No. Shorter, please, shorter, please. Pick a chapter, pick an excerpt, pick a part, right? So give us a sense of it. It doesn't have to be, don't pick like 1,000 words, but pick a section that is coherent, that reads in a way. And if you'd like, put a small note on top of it and say, so this is part of a larger work. I've picked this part, which makes this kind of argument to give you an illustration of the kind of ways I write and the ways I think and the flavor of my dissertation. So pick a, I mean, 10,000 words is not super long. So, I mean, you could technically, but I would say if you can find a coherent excerpt, then use an excerpt. It's probably best. You can still get away with 10,000 at the outside of it. Always better to use a little bit of an excerpt if you think it works. If you feel like you can't pull a part out of it, then give the whole thing. It's all right. But if you can, I would recommend.
I'm an architect and I've always been interested towards urbanism. Now that my interest also lies a bit on technology, is there a scope for me to learn and explore by combining these two in the UFP?
So yes, though it kind of partly means what you mean by technology. So there are certainly folks and faculty members at IIHS who have a deep interest in technology. And so there are ways in which you can pick and study that up. But if there are specific kinds of technological work that you mean, then it would just depend. I'm not sure what you mean by that. I think, there are ways in which you would be able to curate the right set of faculty for you to pick up that emphasis. We are certainly not as, I don't think we have the same depth in technology as some other institutes that are much more technical than us. We have a technological base and a focus. So it would just partly depend on what you meant. So for example, if you meant geospatial sciences, then it would be perfect. But if you meant technology in terms of, say, energy, it would be very good, because these are all people whose we have faculty expertise in. So one good thing to do is just check out the IIHS main faculty page or the UFP faculty page and take a look at the faculty interests. And when you will see the kind of expertise and if the kind of technology that you're interested in is part of that, then yeah, then you can absolutely look through it, do a lot of stuff like that.
Why is there an age limit? Won't diverse experience bring interesting perspective to the table?
Yeah, it's a long debate. It's a long question. And there are many reasons, many of which are actually not in our control and are regulatory restrictions by various education authorities. Ideally, we would not have one, but we have one now. And we've tried to push it and make the best of it. And every year we apologize for it, but we have to live with it for now.
How do people from completely unrelated fields of work how do people from completely unrelated fields work on the commons? For example, a lawyer or an architect that have nothing in common.
Well, why do you say lawyers and architects have nothing in common? They have lots in common. They have, remember, when you think back to the commons, it's about fundamental approaches of thought to the urban. It's not about specific technical things. So the question that we do is, the lawyer and the architect are looking in Bangalore, in their practica, at a hawker's market. Right? And the thing that they realize at that point is that the hawker's market, right, or lane of street vendors, is both a legal entity and a spatial entity. And the lawyer understands that the architect knows how to understand how to design the market in a certain way that vendors have protected spaces. But the architect understands that the lawyer understands the licensing regimes and the public space regulation laws that allow them to vend in there in the first place. And if they're thinking about a sustainable hawkers market, the point we want the lawyer and the architect to understand is that they both are part of understanding the market. The market does not care about the distinction between its legal part and its spatial part. The vendor does not care. The street vendor does not care about whether they have difficulty vending because their spatial infrastructure is lacking or their license is lacking. So when our problems do not separate themselves and neatly fall into disciplinary categories, then why should our approaches? So actually, one of the key reasons why we work 2 days a week, 40% of your time in actual sites in the city is because the city actually teaches you that the knowledge and disciplinary divisions are artificial, that there is not a simple place where one thing ends and the other begins. So the practica and the teamwork is actually exactly designed to get people from different disciplines to speak to each other, to recognize how they leverage each other's strengths, to also begin to recognize that there is nothing that is, and so the architect has to ask themselves, how much of law do I need in my practice? And the lawyer begins to understand how the spatial formation shapes the questions of access and entitlement to law. And it's that combination we're interested in. So the way we think about breaking a lot of the disciplinary boundaries, one is to give everyone the basics of how to speak in each other's disciplines. So we will teach you how to read an act. We will teach you the difference between an act and a policy and a program and a mission. We will teach you what the difference between interpretive and derivative law is as it impacts the urban. We will also teach you how to think about spatial form. We will also tell you think about infrastructure. So one is that both, by the end of the commons, both the lawyer and the architect have a shared common vocabulary. They're not only speaking one after the other using their own jargon. They have a shared vocabulary. And the other is they are working problem backwards and place backwards. And the minute you work problem backwards and place backwards, we found that in the teams, those disciplines vanish. Of course, there's tension and friction and angst, without which there would be no learning and we would not be normal people. But it's mostly very productive. And that's really our premise. Our entire premise is that these disciplines must mix and they must do the difficult work of learning to listen to each other and begin to speak then a common language. That usually it works very well. And our disciplinary mix has usually been very productive and very positive.
Okay, last question. Can you please elaborate on the sample of work that needs to be submitted? What kind of work would be considered as sample work?
So again, it depends on your training. So if you have to give us a piece of work that you've been involved in. So if you're an architect, for example, you may want to give us a portfolio. If you want to give us a portfolio, just make sure you tell us what your part of the work is and show us or explain to us your thinking process. Don't just give us a set of rendered sheets that you did in third year studio. If you are a social scientist, then you may have a written piece of work that may be individual or group. Give us a sense of that. Tell us again about your thinking. Write a little note in addition to it. If you're a visual artist, send us some work. If you're a sound artist, send us a sound file. Right. So just we want a sense of just a reflection of your training and capabilities as they have come. So you think a little bit about that?
Okay, there's one question. How do fellows engage with the urban outside of the classroom?
I mean, so several ways. One is, of course, you all live together. So you actually you live in a new city and, and you engage with the urban entity on that. But remember, 40% of your teaching is outside the classroom. So you engage with the urban directly because every Thursday and every Friday you have no classes and you're by yourself in the city itself and you're working on neighborhoods, you're analyzing, you're drawing, you're representing, you're interviewing, you're walking, you're making propositions, you're meeting institutions, you're taking interviews, you're looking at data. So you're constantly engaging with a very real urban, which is 2 wards in Bangalore that are your home for the first 8 weeks. And then when you go into the project, you do the same thing. But even in your classes, for example, one of the things we do in the Commons is that we use the Bangalore lake system as a connecting thread, right? So we teach you economy, ecology, infrastructure, planning, governance, right? And how do we show you that all of them happen at the same time? We take the example of the lake. So you come into class, you go to the lakes in Bangalore in your first week, right? You look at them as a system. You think of them as an ecological system. You think of them as a set of water natural bodies. Then in identity and practice, we say actually the lakes are also about complex community claims, identities, livelihood practices, mythological traditions. In planning, you look at the lakes as a contested kind of category in zoning. In governance, you look at the distinction between who governs lakes, encroachment on the side, development authority doing evictions, fishing livelihood starting moved, dhobi ghats being moved. In ecology, you look at water and infrastructure, you look at stormwaters and rajgalves. So we keep, so you look at the lakes in week 1, you do 2 weeks of commons, you go back to the lakes in week 3, and we say, now look at them again. You do 2 more weeks of the common, we send you back to the lakes in week 6, and now look at the lakes again. So the lakes become a way in which you keep saying, okay, all of these layers that I'm being taught in the commons, they play out in the lakes. You can't understand the lakes without understanding all of them, right? So you are constantly engaging with the urban outside the classroom. You're doing it in structured ways through your practica and your project. You're doing it in class, and you're doing it in everyday life. And then after the commons, before you go to the electives, we take people on 2 exposure trips. So half the batch goes to Chennai and half the batch goes to Mumbai. And there for 7 days, we say, okay, we taught you for 9 weeks. Now look at this new city, or an old city if you know them from earlier. Now look at them through new lenses and see how you're looking at the city differently. So you also engage the urban in that way. So there's multiple ways in which you're constantly engaging with the urban outside the classroom.
Okay, that's about
If we have a small bunch, are we done? Because we can, if we have only a few more, we can just
no,
close
we
it out.
don't have any more questions.
Good.
No, yeah, it's 6:20.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, folks. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Good luck to all of you in your applications. Check in with us if you need any help. Tune into the rest of the webinars. Please spread the word about the fellowship as well. And in parting message, just remember this again. Don't try and write an impressive application. Try and write an honest application. That's the one that we're going to remember. And we're not looking to hear or be impressed by everything you've already done. Honesty, curiosity, integrity, tell us a good story, tell us who you are, and ask yourself seriously if this is the right fellowship for you at this time. The fit matters more than anything else. Okay. Good luck to all of you. Please stay safe in this time, and reach out and help whoever you can. And take care and have a good rest of the day.